it's absolutely essential that we think and act adaptively at every level, including the global level, including the inner level, in terms of psychological and spiritual shifts. The level which is the most non-negotiable of all is the level of community. And what I would say to anyone listening is, if you are still not sure what your place is in response to this great challenge and crisis of our times, then the place that you can find, that everybody can find a place in, is literally place.
Well, welcome, both of you, to the Accidental Gods podcast, where we get to talk about a book that all three of us have contributed to, which is new. I love doing new stuff. So, Morgan first, and then Rupert. How are you and where are you this lovely Friday afternoon?
Hi, Amanda. Hi, Rupert. Great to be with you. I am fine. Yeah, been a long week, but surviving it. And I'm in West Wales, in Ceredigion. So I'm very fortunate. Right.
Are you near the sea?
Yeah, I can see it out the window.
Can you? Oh, okay. I have sea envy. Oh, right. And Rupert, you're near the Norfolk Broads. I remember because we nearly drowned in them last time I came to visit you. How are you? And I'm assuming you are in Norfolk, although you have just come off a live thing with Times Radio, which does leave me very
I'm very busy because it's COP time.
Yes.
And I am here at home, so I can look out my window onto our wonderful third of an acre, where we're trying to build a little bit of local resilience and certainly growing a large amount of food in a biodiversity-friendly way. As I look around the room I'm in, which is the garden house, I can see a truly enormous number of squash and pumpkins, which is always incredibly exciting for me. So yeah, I'm doing right.
Right, and now I have Scotch envy because all of ours got hit by frost over here in the west of England. So ours my plants all died. I think we had one plant survive into actually making stuff. So you guys are going to be feeding the rest of us when Trump and his cabal managed to completely crash the world economy and we're all left fending for ourselves. Exciting life just around the corner. However, we are recording this while COP29, I believe, is still in process. I have to say I've been listening to Ed Miliband, who seems extremely bullish about this. We'll get on to what you think about it later. But to begin with, Rupert, I think you were the progenitor of this book. Morgan and I both contributed to it. Tell us a little bit about how it came about and what you want from it.
Yeah, so I've been working with others for quite a long time now on the concept of transformative adaptation. And when I turned more to trying to form, along with others, a sort of transformative adaptation movement, and this started in, about late 2019 and started to ramp up in 2020, it became an idea that eventually started to take form as a potential book project. The book has been a long time actually coming. I think it's coming to fruition at a really wonderful time for it, because we're at a moment when really for the first time, a lot of people are frankly waking up to how bad the situation is and are realizing that a decarbonization only response is plainly now not adequate. And Morgan came on board at a pretty early stage because, of course, Morgan has been one of the leading voices for taking adaptation seriously in his book, Great Adaptations, and also in his work with the charity, the Glacier Trust. So it was relatively easy for Morgan and I to decide that we wanted to do this book together. The book, as I hope we'll be coming on to, is pretty unusual in that not only does it have a lot of us in it and a lot of you, Manda, but it's got a lot of other voices too. You know, this book is a truly collective work, as befits the whole idea of transformative adaptation. It comes from this kind of mini movement, which has taken form in the Transformative Adaptation collective, and the experiences that we've had, and we, a whole load of us, and that have taken form in various organizations that now exist, as well as the sort of incipient movement, as I say, of transformative adaptation itself.
Okay, thank you. So Morgan, fill us in a little bit. Rupert's been on the podcast more than anybody else except Simon Misha. So tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about Great Adaptations and the Glacier Trust and everything else that you do, and then your introduction to the concept of transformative adaptation, if you can unpick that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So, I guess I've been an environmentalist of different types, I think, since for most of my adult life. I think it really was in my adult life that I started to become more awakened to it, for this in late 90s, early 2000s. Geography graduate, environmental science, PhD in environmental education, and followed by working in various NGO world, both kind of in environmental education directly. So, working on the Eco School project for a number of years, working as a kind of freelancer, going and delivering environmental education sessions in different forms through schools, and that kind of work, which was great and on the ground. Then coupled that then with kind of an interest in the global south, but there's a bigger world out there than just the UK, and so being fortunate enough to work for a smaller charity that focus on intercultural understanding, and taking me to various places around the world to get a better appreciation of what life could like there, and then inevitably how environmental impacts are shaping what the world is like. Around about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I joined the Glacier Trust, which is a very small charity focused on enabling climate change adaptation in the Himalayas, in Nepal. Quite a lot of the work in Solakumbu, which is in the Everest region. I visited Nepal 5 times in that period to really understand what is happening, the impact that climate change is happening in those mountain environments. So they just had a horrific flood in Kathmandu and up the Kathmandu Valley, which kind of got lost in the news cycle, but it happened and many lives were lost. So really my role was to fundraise for them and to raise awareness of them, which is what led to Great Adaptation. So that was a book written to look at different forms of adaptation that are happening in different parts of the world, and just trying to talk about them. I think probably first about 15 years ago or so, through the Common Cause movement, and reconnected, I guess, around the time of the Extinction Rebellion, and became aware of what we was doing around transformative adaptation, and sort of then worked together to think, we need to we'd capture this moment, the emergence of this idea of transformative adaptation with various bits of writing happening, which Rupert was spearheading, but we felt we should document them in a book of some sort. So that's kind of part of how this came about.
Okay. And we should have Maddy Harland on here really as the editor of Permanent Press, but she and Rupert and I did another video which will be out and which I will link to this in the show notes. So Rupert, for people who haven't followed every single episode of the podcast, there must be 1 or 2 people out there who haven't. Tell us what adaptation is, what transformative adaptation is, and then do this too briefly. I'd really like to unpick the concept that decarbonisation is not enough. And who else gets this? Because I think there's a lot about decarbonisation at COP that seems to be rattling around in a bit of its own sealed container, as if that was enough. So let's head down that road.
Yeah, very good. So let's start off with an even more broad concept of climate action. What do you think of when you think of climate action? I think what a lot of people think of is stuff like putting in solar panels and doing various other things that will reduce our collective carbon footprint. And that's great, but it's not good enough, frankly, at this moment for that to be the main image that we have of climate action. Climate action also needs to be us protecting ourselves against climate impacts. And that's basically what climate adaptation is. Climate adaptation is the process of proactively and reactively responding to the actual vulnerabilities, which increasingly we are subject to, right? So this idea of climate adaptation is increasingly important, but it's entirely possible for adaptation to go in the wrong direction. If all you do is what's called defensive adaptation, or critically called shallow adaptation, if all you do, for example, against the risk of flooding is build ever higher hard flood defenses, then you're doing something which is carbon heavy, something which is fragile and actually makes your setup more fragile, because eventually those defenses will go out or be overtopped. If that's all you do, right, you're just making sure that the situation will eventually overwhelm you. So we've got to have a way of adapting which actually rolls with the punches, which works with nature rather than against nature, which works with decarbonization rather than against decarbonization, which works in the direction of the kind of society we need to be having and want to be having anyway, the change society, the better society that our hearts know is possible, right? And that's basically what transformative adaptation is. Transformative adaptation is a name for the right kind of adaptation. And, there's a clue in that word, transformative. We're looking at a future which is going to be very different. And we need to create that future in a way that is fully aware of how very difficult the path that is ahead of us is going to be. Because we're going to be having to deal for a long time to come with a rising tide of impacts and with literal rising tides. So that's essentially where transformative adaptation comes in. Now, what was the last bit of your question?
The fact that a lot of the world seems to think that decarbonization is enough,
thank you.
And we know that it's not.
Yes, absolutely. So as I say, it's clear now that awareness of this is starting to grow. But I emphasize the word starting. If you look at the coverage of COP, for example, it's still overwhelmingly about decarbonization. Well, I say that. I mean, actually, a lot of it's about how the president of Azerbaijan wants more oil and gas and how the process is corrupt and so forth. But let's leave that on one side if we're able to. There isn't nearly enough focus and there isn't nearly enough money going into adaptation and into what is called loss and damage, which is actual compensation for when people have these terrible events happen to them at scale. So what we're saying in the book, and also what we're saying more generally in the Climate Majority Project, which I run, is that now is the time to focus much more on the right kinds of adaptation, not as a complete alternative to decarbonization, of course. As I've already mentioned, actually, transformative adaptation seeks to go hand in hand with decarbonization, but to put much more of an emphasis on adaptation, to be, in a certain sense, adaptation first, actually. I mean, here's one good reason for being adaptation first in one's approach. If you are not robust against impacts, then you risk getting knocked out, you risk getting derailed. Think tanks, for example, are just starting, and I emphasize the word starting, but it is happening, just starting to get serious about this risk of derailment. For example, the IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, has done one or two very good reports on this recently. I've been talking with them quite a lot. So one needs to avoid derailment. Think about it in the context of the UK, for example, where I know you have quite a lot of listeners, Manda, for obvious reasons. The government here has its 5 missions. But what we're saying in the Climate Majority Project is there needs to be another mission. And that mission is to protect it against climate impact. Because if we don't have that mission, all the other missions, especially the decarbonization of the electricity supply mission, risk getting swept aside. So that's really the point. There is a real sense in which it does make sense to have a kind of adaptation first approach. Here's another way in which adaptation is a really good place to start. For a lot of people, decarbonization is awfully distant. There are these endless litanies of guesses and percentages in years, 2035, 2050, etc. Adaptation is much more concrete. It's kind of in the here and now. You see what's happening in Spain, say, or indeed in this country in September with the bad floods that we had here. You start to realize, we've got to handle this differently, right? We're looking at a changed situation, that there is no new normal. We're going to be in a constant posture now of trying to adapt and transform in relation to what's happening. Adaptation is more concrete to people. In that sense, it could be crucial to the ambition of seeking to mainstream climate action, which, as you know, is an ambition that's very close to my heart.
Okay, there are a huge number of things I want to unpick in there, particularly the 6th mission. But before we do that, let's come back to Morgan. And for you, Morgan, just could you unpick your version of what transformative adaptation means? But particularly, I want to go down the route of the fact that this is a way of framing the kind of society that we want to get to. Because it seems to me that we've had the US elections. If they were not stolen, and if it is not the case that there is some change possible, then we've lost the US. It's basically going to be full-on fascism. Project 2025. They're going to have their white supremacist patriarchal theocracy that Bannon's been working for so hard. And they're going to go flat out for fossil fuel consumption and all the way down on anything that they consider to be green. I don't think that ideology actually ever beats biophysical reality, but it'll take a little while for that to hit them. So what can we do to help to shape the kind of society that we would like to see in a way that we can express to people who don't necessarily get their news from where we get it from and don't necessarily think as we think? Over to you, Morgan. That's a big ask, I realise. Pick whatever you want out of that.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah. I think, we've talked about it already, but I think to recognise it is that we are in the age of adaptation now. And whether you like it or not, you're adapting to climate change, and it's happening probably subconsciously as well as consciously. It can come down to smaller things of having a slightly bigger bottle of water when you go out during the day. That's an adaptation. And so this adaptation is going on, and I think there's kind of a need to become conscious of the fact that we're adapting in the first place, because if we're not conscious of it and not thinking about the impact of our adaptation choices, we can end up creating collateral damage, but we can also obviously end up creating collateral benefits as well if we're smart about how we're doing adaptation. So I kind of think about adaptation in the same way as I think about transport or food. There are green ways to adapt, just as there are green ways to travel. And so really to think about what sorts of adaptations we want to be doing, and be conscious of the adaptations that we are doing, probably not quite sort of aware of at the minute. But yeah, ultimately, this is ultimately a book about societal transformation, because I think if we were to look back 100 years from now, if we look back at what's happening in this age, in this period now, we will see the human species that is wreaking horrific damage on the planet and on our own species as well as other species. We'll see effort to try to make people aware of that and to try and sort of slow that down and limit that. We'll see that going on, and we'll see that this kind of scramble to adapt, which is happening in like most things in an unequal way. If you've got more resources, you can afford to adapt. I live on the west coast of Wales, just up the coast here in Aberaeron, which is where I went to school. A huge seawall is being built, and Rupert's talked about the pros and cons of building concrete seawall, but it's being built to protect the town, because that town will, already the football pitch in that town, which I used to play on, is under sea level as it is, and so it needs to be protected from the rising sea level. And £30 million is being spent on that. But if you go to a different part of the world, they don't have £30 million to spend on the seawall. I mean, most of Wales doesn't have that sort of money, but Aberaeron is a jewel in the crown of Welsh tourism, so it obviously does get protected, and which is great. I mean, I love it. I think it's one of my favourite places in the world. So we're in a state of adaptation, but the societal transformation needs to happen within it. So that's kind of how I think about what transformative adaptation is. In the age of adaptation, are we also adapting? Are we also transforming society at the same time? Because ultimately, if we don't transform society, the planet and the atmosphere and climate change will accelerate to a point where it's impossible to adapt to it. We won't be able to build high enough.
The sixth mass extinction will happen, and it's not going to be the large hairless bipeds that are amongst the 3% that survive.
So the societal transformation needs to be happening at the same time as the adaptation happening. So again, if we're looking back from 100 years back to now, we'll hopefully see we'll hopefully be able to recognise that transformation was happening. And in terms of what that is, I mean, I think this is a really interesting area which lots of us are getting exploring all around the world at the moment, as we see, the rise of fascism and the kind of maybe the end of neoliberal capitalism and fascism.
The end of democracy, possibly.
The end of democracy, end of Western civilization. These things are starting to be eaten by their own contradictions and starting to collapse around us, it seems. And what emerges from that, will it be successor civilization as opposed to a successor civilization? And what do those look like? And so I think this is where we talk in the book quite a bit about Rojava in Syria or southern Kurdistan, depending on your perspective, which is, an example, would think, of kind of a TrAD type movement happening based in, the thinking of Murray Bookchin, which is a doctor by Abdul Öcalan, and then sort of creating this society based on ecological principles and feminism, equality, multiculturalism, and essentially, and most importantly, I think, decentralized democracy in the kind of democratic confederalist model, which is a different form of democracy, which doesn't lead to power grant. And we're seeing these sorts of things emerging, and they're based on ultimately an understanding that we are not independent selves, we are interdependent selves. And it's also based on trusting that human beings deep down are good, and we can trust them to make good decisions, and so that therefore decision making can be devolved because we can trust the people to make good decisions for themselves about their own lives. And that's the kind of societal transformation that, the citizen movements and things going on, and whatever it's a democracy and citizen assembly, these sorts of things seem to be a kind of bubbling up of that, which I think is there. We capture some of that in the book, I think, but we'll have more to say, I'm sure. And just South London.
Yes. Murray Bookchin is amazing. Yes, and I will put links to some other writing about Rojava because it's really impressive. I never know whether it's municipal federalism or federal municipalism, but either way, they do create this decentralized democracy in a way that actually works, which is one of the reasons why, until very recently, the US and Turkey and everywhere else were all trying to destroy them. But they haven't succeeded yet. Who knows where we're going? Rupert, so let's go back to leading a sixth mission. First of all, I think we lost the sound a little bit there. So can you tell us what the sixth mission actually is, clearly and cleanly? And then if Starmer and Miliband, so this is in the UK, or anybody around the world, I am seeing movements to create bi-regional nations, to get rid of nation states and move towards coordinations. All of the things that we will need to do if we're going to face fascism, I think, is find federalized, decentralized, democratic ways of actually trusting people. And I would say clearly at this point that I think one of the differences between fascism and whatever we want to call adaptationism, possibly, there'll be a better, you will think of a more catchy word than that, is that we trust the people. We trust people, whereas the whole point of fascism is they trust nobody except an inner cabal. If we're going to spread trust and the concept of decentralized democracy such that people are able to make decisions and share in coherent, useful group decisions that are not necessarily bound by Hobbesian concepts of nation states, on what would that be predicated? How are we going to help, or what do you see as possibly the roots of a likely new kind of democratic concept and a new society that would get us forward? So sixth mission, and then what are its baselines, really?
Yeah. So the Labour government in the UK has 5 missions, which one can debate how good or bad these missions are. They do seem to include some good things, like the idea of decarbonising the electricity supply. And the point I'm seeking to make is that all of these missions risk getting swept away. Everything that we care about risks getting swept away as the pace of climate chaos steps up, which tragically we're locked into that stepping up for some considerable time to come now. So the idea is there needs to be another mission. You have to have a climate adaptation mission, not just a climate decarbonisation mission. If you don't have a climate adaptation mission, then you don't actually really even have a climate decarbonisation mission. You don't have one secure because, your pylons may get blown over or whatever. I'm not a technical expert on this, but my understanding is that there is some good reason to believe that the electricity supply in this country, including the new stuff in relation to which this government wants to bring in with the greening of the electricity supply, has not been thoroughly robustified against the kind of winds and storms and heat waves, etc., that we're likely to have.
Can I interject there? Partly because I was in Cambridge earlier this week. Hi to the people who listen to the podcast and then hold groups to discuss it. Hello, people in Cambridge. One of my friends is in a village outside Cambridge, and the local landowner wishes to set up a solar park, 5 square miles of solar panels for which they will earn £2 million per year. Nobody in the community will earn anything at all. And it seems to me that decarbonising the electricity supply means massively increasing other material consumption. First of all, where is the copper coming from? Where is the silicon coming from? How much power is in all of those solar panels? But also, I am not seeing any effort at all to create what I would call regenerative power creation, in that what impact is this going to have on 5 square miles of currently farmland? Can we perhaps increase the soil depth, create carbon sequestration, increase biodiversity somehow within a solar farm?
Yeah.
Are you aware, either of you, of any effort to do something other than just blanket solar panels across the land? Rupert, yes, go for it.
Yeah. So it's a really good set of points. One point to make in relation to that is that, of course, you are absolutely right that it is scandalous the way that decarbonisation is being done, mostly without any regard to actually building or involving communities. And
It could be a community farm, and they could have the 2 million. But no, somebody who's already got too much money is going to make it. So this is basically predatory capitalism on steroids.
Yeah. In terms of the impacts of a solar farm, they can actually be good if you do them in the right way. They can be good for biodiversity, incredible though it may sound.
Have you got links for that we can put in the show notes after?
I can try to find some.
Interesting. Okay.
A lot of British farmland, of course, is a nature desert, whereas a solar farm can be done in a different way. It can also be good for soil regeneration. The most exciting prospect is of what's being called agrovoltaic farming, where you actually have solar panels which are deliberately raised above the ground, and you can grow crops under them. This may be a really smart idea if we continue to go down the path of global overheating in this country, because we may get to a stage where some crops are being, basically burnt in the fields by having too much sunlight. And this idea of agrovoltaic farming is quite an exciting possibility.
But my really basic understanding of botany is that anything that grows needs actual sunlight in order to do basic photosynthesis, which is a kind of fundamental to plant growth.
Of course. But what my point is, you can have too much of a good thing, and we're liable to get too much of a good thing coming in the overheated climate that we're moving into. And by the way, there's just a little sidebar there before we go to Morgan on this. And this is possibly something we should come back to. Of course, one of the really big adaptations that we need to be making is, and this is genuinely transformative, is to be actually taking seriously the idea that we do not know that we're going to have a future of getting hotter and hotter in this country. We could get colder. We have to be open to both colder and hotter futures. That's the true adaptation challenge.
Yes, because we're in climate chaos, not just climate change. And if the amok shit switches off, we're seeing minus 40 degrees in the winter, and I don't think we've adapted for that at all, frankly. Okay, Morgan, you had your hand up. Go on, let's have an input from you.
Yeah, I was just going to come in on a point about shades, just a brief point from a learning in the book. So one of the adaptation strategies they put in place there is to grow more coffee, because coffee can thrive in higher altitude now because of climate change. So it's moving gradually up the hill. But coffee is a plant that needs shade. If it doesn't have shade, it gets too hot, insects land on it, or inside and kill it from the inside. So they're shaded with banana trees, easily by hot, so bamboo and so on. And then they can have layer farming, so they can grow.
Okay. So kind of like a food forest.
Yeah. So it's a lovely sort of, obviously uses a small amount of land, which on terraced mountainsides are really important. So that's a quick one on shade, but I also wanted to make a point about decarbonisation of the UK and the problems around local resistance to sort of large scale renewable projects. And I think, in a Welsh context, we have a lot of opposition to wind farms, but the opposition is more to the pylons than the wind farms because of how many pylons are needed to transport the energy. I think two things there are going on. I think if a community has more say over how they're going to power their town and village, and is able to make the choices themselves, they will likely make choices to have green energy rather than fossil fuel energy, because we bet most people do want climate action. All the data shows that. They will look at situations where one person doesn't hoard all the wealth that comes from doing that. And so that will hopefully enable more acceptance of the decisions to build renewable infrastructure compared to when they're centrally controlled.
Is that happening? Are you seeing any inclination on behalf of any government anywhere in the world to make the power generation more communitarian and less predatory capital?
But yes, in some other countries, there's much more like that.
Okay.
For example, in the German-speaking countries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There
Back to
are
Morgan.
examples. And the other point is, we talk about decarbonisation, but I think what we're seeing at the moment is just more electricity being generated.
Right. And we're still burning more fossil fuels, and we're still what we're doing is increasing more power.
We're just adding more and more.
Yeah.
So I think that feeds into I don't like seeing fields covered in pylons and windmills. I'd rather they be fields,
And solar panels.
Yeah, and so but I accept it because of my belief about the climate. But it's harder. It's a harder pill to swallow. That electricity generation isn't replacing fossil fuel energy.
Yeah,
actually just adding to it, because it's actually just creating more problem altogether.
Yes.
And not really helping into.
This is Jevon's paradox, and it's applying full time.
We're not actually decarbonising.
Right.
Of course that's true. And what that really accentuates is the terrible trouble that we're in. The really low probability, frankly, if one was a betting man, that we're going to get out of it. And all this does is accentuate the need for adaptation. And this is one of the key points about adaptation. It's a kind of backstop to everything. Whenever something goes wrong, even if it goes wrong with adaptation itself, the answer is more adaptation. So what do I mean by that? So for example, if, as is likely to be the case, the government fails to adopt a sixth mission and fails to protect us adequately, the answer isn't, of course, just to kind of throw up one's hands and give up. The answer is, well, then we default to the local level and the community level, and we seek to make the adaptations that we can there. And that's a lot of what the book is about. I mean, that's a lot of what Transformative Adaptation, the TrAD collective, is about, and the other examples that we feature in the book, the foreign examples from Nepal and Rojava, the domestic examples that have started, that people in the book are involved with, like community climate action, like the climate hubs and so forth.
Right. So let's come to this, because I have in my notes, you mentioned the IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, and you've been talking to them quite a lot recently. And my question was, to what extent is central government listening to the IPPR? Because if you talk to them full time, that's really lovely, but not if they're whistling in the wind and nobody is paying attention to them. And I've been listening to Ed Miliband at COP, and he is extremely aware that one of the convenient excuses for why the American election appears to have gone the way that it appears to have gone, I'm using a lot of conditionals in there because I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on, is that whatever Biden did, however inadequate it was in terms of adaptation, he was at least nodding in the direction of climate chaos being a thing and wanting to do something about it. But what he wasn't doing was explaining to, in very heavy air quotes, ordinary people, how this impacted their lives. He didn't say, you're going to get better jobs, you're going to have lower costs because we're going to insulate your houses better. We're going to reduce the impacts, we think, of more climate chaos. This last one is obviously impossible, but people still mop it up in their narratives. And I think he's really taken on board the fact that he's probably got 4 years to change the narrative, or Reform UK is the next government in the UK. And everywhere around the world, we need to get through to the people who never listen to podcasts like this, that there are things that will impact their lives now that will make them better. They will be happier. But it seems to me, if happier, better means, and then you get to consume more, you can buy more boxes off Amazon, you can have more flights to the sun, you can lie on beaches forever, then you're right. Then we are basically screwed. I think I'm allowed to say that. It's my podcast. And I want to quote you guys from Von Wilkins' his PhD thesis. He's got a concept that humanity, our culture, the trauma culture, the Western educated, industrial rich, democratic culture, weird, is locked in a set of psychopathological behaviors which are identical to trapped zoo animals. And he says, I'm going to read this out. The collective developmental trauma that we experience points to a cage that is constructed through norms and conventions and a faulty definition of sanity that condones us living in a way that is killing our own life support system. By living in a way that is anti-ecological and hurting us, but then naming it sanity, we validate and condone it, and then teach it to our kids. It becomes a secret cage that prevents us from living as functioning members of the Earth community. So I'd like to come to Morgan first, because teaching it to our kids, I think, are born expecting to arrive in tribes and to be cherished in a kind of serotonin mesh of care and companionship and connection. And instead, we find the horror of Western culture with its separation, scarcity, and powerlessness. And unless we can unpick the collective developmental trauma, then we're not going to be able to change people's behaviours. And however much we tell them that insulating their house is a good thing, they're going to continue behaving the way they have before. How are you finding that education lands with the kids, and does it ripple out to their wider community? And then, Rupert, I want to come and talk to you about community change. So Morgan first, education. Over to you.
Yeah, good question. And I think, that quote is powerful and I wouldn't disagree with it. I think what we're finding in my work at Global Action Plan, which is my sort of day job now as Director of Education, I'm doing lots of work around the kind of worldviews and beliefs that young people hold and how those are formed over time. And the research we've been fortunate to be able to do around young people's values and their perceptions of other people's values has been really instructive. So we've seen that when we speak to young people and interview young people about the values they hold, most of them hold compassionate, caring, collaborative, creative values. So the kind of all intrinsic values or passionate values, self-direction values. But crucially, they also see others that hold in those values, which is accurate, as most of us do. Most of us deep down are compassionate people. You have some psychopaths, obviously. But
most of them in charge of the US now, but yeah.
70-80% of the population is inherently deep down good people. But what happens, the research we did shows, is that as young people get older, their kind of perception of others, they become more and more sort of pessimistic about other human beings. They start to see them as being more self-interested, more competitive, more individualistic, less compassionate, less collaborative, less likely to help others out. And so this perception gap opens up. But we know from other research previously, Common Cause, TrAD have done some great work on this around the values perception gap that exists in adults. And we see that when we believe that others are self-interested, we are sort of more despondent about taking action ourselves. We're less motivated to do it. We don't see the point. We don't feel any solidarity. We feel alone and caring. And so we're seeing that if we can, from an educational point of view, if we can help young people to continue to hold on to that accurate idea that they are not alone in being caring, compassionate people, then they are more likely to understand that they are not independent selves, they're interdependent selves. And they're more likely to collaborate, more likely to feel that solidarity about taking social action, and just more inclined to do it. And so the sort of design of the education projects we do at Global Action Plan are all grounded in that idea that we need to help young people to, either hold on to that or to critique their belief that others are self-interested. And I think that's something which needs to happen gradually. So in numerous different ways, in sort of constantly learning, we constantly start thinking it and how to do it. But it's the key thing is that all work is good work. We don't work. We don't have individual projects. We always work. Young people are working together in a group and understanding the different roles they play, learning each other's strengths, taking on different roles at different times to learn more about them, to grow the sort of empathy between. And we talk about research with them. We actually show them that we do things like interview people to see what they care about and then show those interviews to their peers, not their best friends, the kind of their acquaintances within the school. Then they say, oh, I thought that person would just cared about their own status and image and fame, but actually turned out that on the weekend they volunteer or whatever they volunteer at, or they do care about animals or stuff they'd be embarrassed to say, in a sort of individual societies. Even just doing that to help them to see it and help them to unpick that sort of thing. But there's really interesting stuff I've been reading about recently by Hikaru Komatsu, who's an academic in Japan, looking at the difference between the independent self and the interdependent self, and showing that in Japanese schools, they're actually purposely setting out to help young people to understand their interdependence. And this filters right through to kind of how they run lunchtime and how adults eat with young people involved in growing the food. They understand the interdependencies that are going on, and that is a way of kind of reinforcing and teaching those compassionate values. And there's lots of ways that they were exploring them and experimenting and innovating as much as they can in that phase of them, because they think it's a big part of the kind of transformation, the internal transformation that needs to go on to create the societal transformation is the transformation of our worldviews and beliefs. So if we have these worldviews, everybody's selfish, that those worldviews need to be transformed, especially in individualistic societies like the UK and the US, where they're hyper-individualistic. The big part of the challenge to create societal transformation is that internal transformation that needs to happen.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, to what extent is the societal narrative impacting the young people? I'm really struck by your assertion that they start off feeling connected, feeling their interdependence, but as they grow older, they see the rest of the world as being more cut off and more motivated by extrinsic values than their own intrinsic values. And I wonder how much of that is our television, movies, the I suppose by now TikTok videos, YouTube, and that if we were able to change the broader narratives of, I don't know, let's say a Bond movie and all of the soaps and the Marvel franchise and things were less obviously extrinsically motivated, is it coming from those, or is it coming from watching everybody else glued to their phones and buying stuff off Amazon?
It's all of it. It's all of it. I think, and the education system itself is inherently competitive. Young people are in competition with each other. Schools are in competition with each other. Teachers are in competition with each other, and it's very individualized as well, individualistic.
Right.
And so they're naturally drawn into the cycle of competitiveness. And it goes right back to ideas around survival of the fittest and the kind of enlightened self-interest.
Darwinian.
It goes that far. But what we're learning, I think, through the kind of studies that we're seeing more and more of, the survival of the friendliest more than survival of the fittest is the true story of human evolution.
Is there any move in schools anywhere to shift away from the competitive model? I remember Zach Stein saying in the US that there are schools in North Carolina where every single child in the school has got gastric ulcers. And that testing, this really struck me, testing does not assess the children. Very quickly, it assesses the school's capacity to game the system. So all you're achieving is finding out how fast your teachers can learn how to game whatever system you set up. It's completely pointless. And yet, we still hang so much on kids' capacities to be coached through whatever the system is. Is there any move in our kind of hierarchical education system to step away from that?
We could probably do a whole podcast on it.
We could actually. Let's do that. Yes.
But even within the UK, the education system here in Wales is quite different to the one in England and Scotland again as well. So like in Wales, it's more decentralised. Teachers are trusted more to shape the curriculum vocally. It's not essentially controlled what it is. It's less corporatised in Wales compared to in England. But no, there's a curriculum assessment review going on in England right now, and probably my main focus at the minute is how can we influence what the new national curriculum looks like, and will it move more toward a Welsh Scottish type model, or will it continue down its path which is on now, which is still around quite very traditional form of education. Not in the way it's knowledge heavy and not really thinking about skills and values.
Yeah, and we're, the current generation can get anything they like off Google. They don't need that. They need the skills. Anyway, I've watched Rupert looking like he wanted to come in several times. Rupert, well, you were going to say something. Say what you want to say.
Well, just to start on what you two have just been talking about, just to mention, to take us back to the book, that Morgan had a wonderful chapter on transformative education in the book. So anyone who wants to go further, that's a good place to start. And also to comment that it's interesting that we've gotten to the point of mentioning Darwin and evolution and so forth. And this, it seems to me, is one good reason for using the term adaptation. People sometimes say, oh, isn't the term a bit sort of remote or academic? But actually there is a very sort of well understood meaning of the term adapt, which is connected with evolution, which is kind of contested, but is interestingly relevant to what we're talking about. I mean, ultimately, what we need to be doing, folks, and this won't come as a surprise to listeners to this podcast, is evolving, right? The transformative adaptation is a kind of way of understanding in a quite sort of set of straightforward but wide-ranging ways the kind of evolution that humanity needs to go through. And that to some extent, as we've been saying, we will inevitably go through it. The extent to which we embrace it will be the extent to which we avoid collapse and various kinds of horrors and missteps along the way. But that's what we need to do. And you wanted to talk about community, Manda. This to me is the nub of it all. So we could think about transformative adaptation, TrAD as we call it, in one of two ways. And I think they're both super valid. The kind of negative way, which is often the way one starts, is by thinking about TrAD as a response. We need to transformatively adapt because these bloody impacts are coming. We need to find ways of dealing with them. And that's, the essence of the reason why adaptation is essential. But then there's the positive way of thinking about it, which I think is equally important, which is, what does this actually bring us? And what does this buy us? And what is the direction of the kind of flourishing society that we could become? What does this start to look like? And so if we think about, for example, the way we try to model this through the Transformative Adaptation Collective. So one of the main things we do is we gather every year, as you know, Manda, at the Green Gathering on the edge of Wales. And a wonderful little community forms for about a week there. And honestly, I mean, it is such a joy to participate in. So much so that what some of us have been saying to each other recently, and it's really quite an obvious thought, is why don't we always live like this? You know?
That's a shamanic monastery. I have been trying to create the shamanic monastery for about 8 years. Yes.
Exactly. And isn't that what people really want? I mean, we in this hyper individual society that we've been talking about, people are not happy. And what most people actually literally hunger for is communities, things like sitting around a fire with other people, singing and telling stories and having
connecting, feeling held,
being close to each other. This is not anything kind of mysterious or weird, right? This is what most people actually want. And that positive dimension to transformative adaptation is one of the things that really gives me a great deal of hope. The kind of direction that we're pointing in here is a direction which actually goes with the grain of human nature once you get a lot of other stuff out of the way.
Yeah. So if there are any friendly billionaires listening, then we have lots of people
or even
who
just
are
millionaires
absolutely ready to step up. Yeah, but the billionaires tend to have a couple of million to give away, whereas the millionaires think they've got to still building it. Just before we move back to Morgan, I would like to go back to, let's say, Aberero, anywhere that's just spent 30 million on a wall, which just boggles my mind. It's because that's downstream reactive, not responsive.
Yeah.
To what extent, we'll start with Rupert, but come back to Morgan. Are you finding that local communities are no longer in denial? I have to say I'm surrounded by people who will still look me in the eye and tell me that climate change is not happening and it's a Chinese myth. But getting enough people in any given geographic place to acknowledge that climate change is here, and then for them to work on what we might loosely call upstream responses rather than building a expletive deleted wall, which is not going to work, guys. I hate to break this to anybody, but it's not going to work. So how are you finding that playing out?
So that's obviously a huge open piece. I guess that my key point on it would be things are changing. It's quite clear that things are shifting, and in some ways quite fast in my experience. I think things are different now from the way they were a year ago. They're different now even from the way they were 3 months ago, frankly. The US presidential election result has woken up a bunch more people as well. If Harris had won, the downside of that would have been that risk of complacency. Yeah. And you can't be complacent when you've got that complete lunatic in the White House. So it's complicated. But what I see in my own community, for example, is that there is some willingness, and that there is more willingness than there used to be. My wife and I are among those who are trying to build some resilience, trying to do some transformative adaptation here on the ground in this little part of Norfolk. And, we're absolutely not alone. And the key thing about transformative adaptation is that it is a framework for thinking about how to do this kind of thing, which does what you said, Manda. It goes upstream. It asks questions like, can we really be safe from the greater terrible flooding events, the deluges that are going to come, if we don't do anything about upland water management, if we don't do anything about agricultural runoff, et cetera, right? We all know that we have to ask these questions, and that we have to get somewhat more systemic than we have been. And yeah, that's the direction of travel. Will we get there fast enough? Probably not, but we've got to try. And on the way, as we do try, going back to the previous question, we will also have all these amazing co-benefits of community and greater security and more of a sense of meaning, which is missing from so many people's lives. So that's the way in which this really is a kind of win-win-win approach. There are so many ways in which it ticks all the different kinds of boxes that we actually need.
Thank you. Morgan, you looked like you were wanting to leap in several times there. Over to you.
Well, the point I was going to make was, you could probably cut the bullet out at this point, but when Rupert was talking about how a need for connection and community and sort of the intimacy of conversations around fires, I think the rise and popularity of podcasts is kind of a attempt at that. Because, I'm an avid podcaster, and I think part of the reason why is because of the intimacy. You feel like you're part of the conversation, even if you're just listening to one. But I think that it is yet another pseudo-satisfier of our inherent human needs, that we're using podcasts, I guess, as a way to sort of feel connected to people who have similar worldviews to us, but we don't assume that they are actually in the communities around us. But we're kind of, again, it's just something which is packaged up and thought to us as the satisfier of that need for connection.
Speaking as a podcaster, though, I think there's quite a lot of a community built around the podcast.
Yeah.
And I genuinely met some people in Cambridge who meet up to discuss the episodes. And
well, Amanda,
that's
honestly,
creating.
I'm just being truthful when I say that that within the TrAD collective, within our little community, your podcast is one of the closest things there is to that kind of unifying factor. There's a lot of love for accidental gods amidst
Thank you, guys.
of the TrAD tribe.
Yeah. So I would hope that we could create something of communities of place and passion and purpose through sharing of ideas, through opening of doors. It can't. I'm hoping that it's not all just pseudo kind of community, Morgan.
No, I think you're definitely right. And I think even around sports podcasts, I think you see communities developing. There's a very popular one in Wales called the Socially Distant Sports Bar, which was set up during the pandemic.
Podcast,
Out of it, replace conversations down the pub about the sport, and the community around that is going is fantastic because they are constantly reinforcing, activating compassionate values through it, and people then form a community around it. So yeah, I think it's certainly existing, and I think I love the medium, probably my favorite medium now of all media. But it's it was just a short point really about the rise of the popularity of it. I think it reflects on our inherent need to connect.
I think it is worth adding on this point about communities of place. I think we would say, coming from the transformative adaptation perspective, that something that is non-negotiable is you have to take those seriously. But anyone who's kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe the future is all about podcasts and associations at a distance, but that is a complete lack of understanding of where we're headed.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're nearly at the top of the hour. Let's go to Morgan and then to Rupert. If people are listening, and obviously they're going to buy the book and read it, we hope, and Rupert's going to tell us where to buy it, which isn't Amazon, because we are never again touching the giant vampire squid with its tentacles wrapped around the face of humanity since Bezos decided to close down democracy in the US. what actions, what connections, how would you ideally, if everybody listening to this were to take on board a bunch of ideas, what would you like those ideas to be, Morgan?
Me, it would be a kind of reflection or that building of your own self-awareness around how you already are adapting, and actually coming to accept that we are all adaptive now. We're all adapting to the climate change, and I think, and it's not just climate change; it's nature's decline as well. We're also adapting to, we're adapting, and so I think becoming conscious of our own adaptation, so that we can then think more smartly about how we're adapting in the same way we think about how we travel, how we eat, how we holiday. We need to be conscious of it as something that we do as human beings. So I think for me, it would be a bit of internal work first to think, right, what are the ways that I am adapting already? What is my family adapting? My business is adapting? My charity is adapting? With school, and to go from there to think, how can I do it better? How can I do it transformatively?
Right. Fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you, Rupert.
Yeah, amen to that. And what I would add is, well, it's absolutely essential that we think and act adaptively at every level, including the global level, including the inner level in terms of psychological and spiritual shifts. The level which is the most non-negotiable of all is the level of community. And what I would say to anyone listening is, if you are still not sure what your place is in response to this great challenge and crisis of our times, then the place that you can find, that everybody can find a place in, is literally place. That transformative adaptation at the level of building community resilience is something that we need huge numbers of us to do. In some of the ways we've described, it can be hugely rewarding. If we aim at that, the great thing about transformative adaptation is that it's about aiming for the best. And it just so happens that aiming for the best has a really good overlap with preparing for the worst, right? You can do the two simultaneously, and that is precisely what we need to do. And the great thing about it is everyone can do it.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That's a very, very good note to end on. So the book is out. Oh, we're going to end on. Where's the best place to get the book, Rupert?
Well, I would say if you can't get it from your local independent bookstore, first ask them why they haven't got it in yet. But secondly, you can order it online, for example, from the publishers, Permanent Press, who, of course, are the excellent people who produce Permaculture Magazine and who have made this book possible. So, yeah, go to the Permanent Press website.
Yes, I'll put a link in the show notes. And to remind everybody, when you go out to your local independent bookstore, Transformative Adaptation, and the subtitle is, Rupert?
Another world is still just possible.
Fantastic. Which has slight resonances with the podcast. I'm extremely happy about that. Okay, so Morgan Phillips and Rupert Read and all of the team that made this book possible, thank you for coming on to Accidental Gods, and we look forward to celebrating many, many, many copies being shared around the world. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you too, because of course we have to return to a really important point about this book. You've authored quite a bit of it yourself, so thank you for making this possible in more than one way.
You're so welcome. Thank you. And Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Great to meet you.